The courtroom was silent except for the rhythmic tapping of Judge Harriet Wilson's pen against her mahogany bench. Commander Maya Jackson stood tall, her posture military straight despite the orange jumpsuit that hung loosely from her athletic frame. At 42, Maya's face carried the quiet confidence of someone who had faced death and won, multiple times. Her dark eyes, usually warm when among friends, had hardened to obsidian as she stared directly at Officer James Whitley. Whitley fidgeted in the witness stand, adjusting his uniform collar as he recounted, for the third time, how he'd discovered 2 kilos of cocaine in Maya's vehicle during a routine traffic stop. His story was polished, rehearsed, perfect except for one small detail he kept changing: where exactly in the car he'd found the drugs. "And you're certain, Officer Whitley, that the defendant made no attempt to explain the presence of these narcotics?" The prosecutor, a young woman with ambition practically radiating from her pressed suit, seemed almost bored with the proceedings. "Yes, ma'am. Just kept saying she was being set up." Standard denial. Whitley's eyes darted away from Maya's unwavering gaze. Maya's court-appointed attorney shuffled papers beside her, looking overwhelmed. He'd spent all of 15 minutes with her before the hearing. "Your Honor, my client maintains her innocence and has an impeccable service record." "Commander Jackson has, save it for trial, counselor," Judge Wilson interrupted. "We're here to determine bail, not guilt or innocence." What none of them knew, not the smug Officer Whitley, not the ambitious prosecutor, not even her own attorney, was who Maya Jackson really was. Behind her stoic expression, Maya was calculating, assessing, planning her next move with the same tactical precision that had made her one of the most effective special operators in naval history. Only 2 people in the courtroom knew the truth: Maya herself and a silver-haired man seated quietly in the back row. Captain Thomas Richards watched the proceedings with growing anger, his weathered face betraying no emotion, but his mind already reaching out to the extensive network of contacts he'd built over 30 years of naval intelligence work. Maya caught his eye briefly, the smallest nod passing between them. A silent agreement. This wasn't just about clearing her name anymore. This was about exposing a corruption that ran deeper than anyone in this courtroom realized. What Officer James Whitley didn't know when he planted evidence in her car was that he hadn't framed just any black woman. He'd framed one of the first female Navy SEALs in American history, a woman trained not just to survive, but to dismantle entire enemy networks from the inside out. And Maya Jackson was about to bring that training home. 6 months earlier, Maya had returned to her hometown of Riverside after 20 years of service. Her retirement was quiet, which was exactly how Naval Special Warfare Command wanted it. Female SEALs weren't officially acknowledged until recently, and Maya's operations remained largely classified. She'd bought a modest 2-bedroom house in the rapidly gentrifying East Side neighborhood where she'd grown up. Her plan was simple: rest, reconnect with family, and figure out what civilians actually did with their time. Maybe coach basketball at the local high school. Anything normal. Her first warning sign came 3 weeks after moving in, when she noticed a patrol car slowing down whenever it passed her house. By the second month, she'd been pulled over 4 times for minor infractions: a broken taillight she'd just replaced, suspicious driving patterns that consisted of going exactly the speed limit, and once 4, fitting the description, of someone who'd reportedly shoplifted from a convenience store across town. Each time, it was Officer Whitley. Each time, his search of her vehicle became more invasive, his questions more pointed about where she got the money for her modest home. And each time, Maya documented everything, sensing a pattern that her years of intelligence training couldn't ignore. "You're being paranoid," her cousin Darius told her over Sunday dinner at her aunt's house. "That's just how it is around here. Always has been." Maya speared a piece of sweet potato with her fork. "Maybe. But this feels targeted." "Of course it's targeted," her Aunt Loretta said, setting down another plate of cornbread. At 73, she spoke with the blunt wisdom of someone who'd seen it all before. "They're pushing black folks out of East Side fast as they can. Property values going up, new coffee shops opening. Suddenly our neighborhood's up and coming, and that means we're supposed to be going." Maya's younger cousin Tiana, now a community organizer at 25, leaned forward. Aunt Lo's right. Riverside PD's been working overtime to help developers clear the way. There's this one officer who's like their enforcer, Whitley, Maya said, setting down her fork. Tiana's eyes widened. How'd you know? Lucky guess, Maya replied, but her mind was already working, connecting dots. 3 days later, Maya was at the local VA hospital for a routine checkup when she ran into her former commanding officer, Captain Richards. He'd been the one to recruit her for SEAL training 15 years ago, recognizing something in the young intelligence officer that others had missed, an extraordinary capacity for controlled intensity under pressure. "Commander Jackson," he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Thought you were going off-grid for a while." "That was the plan, sir." They found a quiet corner in the hospital cafe, where Richards revealed he was now consulting with the Department of Justice on a special task force. "We're looking into police departments with unusual patterns of civil asset forfeiture. Departments seizing property, cash, vehicles from citizens disproportionately minorities without ever charging them with crimes." Maya sat very still. "And Riverside PD?" "Near the top of our list," Richards confirmed, sliding a napkin across the table with a name scribbled on it. 8 officers in particular show patterns consistent with organized criminal activity rather than legitimate police work. Your friend Whitley leads the pack." Maya memorized the name on the napkin. Rebecca Chen, DOJ, before shredding it. "Why tell me this, sir?" Richard stirred his coffee slowly. "Because 3 whistleblowers from within Riverside PD have died in the past 18 months. Accidents, supposedly. And because I know what you're capable of, Jackson." "I'm retired, sir." "Are you?" he asked quietly. "Because I've been watching you document every interaction with Whitley. Old habits die hard for people like us." Maya said nothing, but her silence was confirmation enough. "Just be careful," Richards warned. "These aren't insurgents or foreign operatives. They're cops who believe they're untouchable. That makes them more dangerous than half the targets you neutralized overseas." 2 weeks later, Maya was driving home from the grocery store when the now familiar flashing lights appeared in her rearview mirror. She pulled over, already reaching for her license and registration. This time, Whitley wasn't alone. Another officer stood at a distance, watching. And this time, Whitley didn't even pretend the stop was legitimate. "Step out of the vehicle, Ms. Jackson." "That's Commander Jackson," she corrected calmly, complying with his order while her body tensed for what might come. "Not anymore," he smirked. "Now you're just another dealer we're taking down." The search was thorough, and when Whitley emerged from the back seat holding a package wrapped in plastic, Maya knew exactly what was happening. She'd seen this same setup in a dozen countries, usually orchestrated by local police on cartel payrolls. Well, Whitley said loudly, making sure his partner could hear. "Look what we have here." Maya kept her face neutral, even as she noticed the partner shifting uncomfortably. "A potential weak link." "That's not mine," she said, her voice steady. "And we both know it." Whitley stepped close, speaking just low enough that his body camera's microphone wouldn't pick it up clearly. "You should have taken the hint and moved. East Side's changing, and people like you don't fit the new image. Now you're looking at 10 to 15 years, minimum." As he cuffed her, Maya noticed a black SUV parked across the street, and the silver-haired man behind the wheel. Richards had been tracking her too. Their eyes met briefly before Maya was placed in the patrol car, and in that moment, she made her decision. This wasn't just about her anymore. This was about justice. The very thing she'd spent her life fighting for in distant lands, now needed right here at home. The preliminary hearing was supposed to be straightforward. The prosecution would present their evidence, the judge would deny bail given the seriousness of the charges, and Maya would be remanded to custody to await trial. That was Whitley's plan, anyway. What he hadn't counted on was Captain Richards making some calls. As the prosecutor finished her arguments against bail, the courtroom doors opened. A woman in a crisp navy suit entered, followed by two men in dark suits who positioned themselves near the exits. The woman approached the bench, handed the judge a folder, and whispered something that made Judge Wilson's eyebrows shoot up. "Ms. Chen," the judge acknowledged, scanning the documents. "This is highly unusual." Rebecca Chen, the DOJ attorney Richards had mentioned, smiled thinly. "So are the circumstances, Your Honor." Judge Wilson cleared her throat. "We'll take a 15-minute recess. Counselors, in my chambers. Now." As the judge left, Maya noticed Whitley's confident demeanor cracking. He was staring at Chen with growing recognition and alarm. The DOJ attorney met his gaze coolly before turning to Maya with a slight nod. During the recess, the courtroom buzzed with speculation. Maya remained composed, watching as Whitley huddled with the prosecutor, their conversation becoming increasingly heated. The prosecutor kept glancing toward Maya with a new expression, uncertainty. When court resumed, everything had changed. "In light of new information provided by the Department of Justice, this court is inclined to grant bail," Judge Wilson announced, avoiding Whitley's stunned gaze. "Furthermore, the prosecution has been instructed to re-evaluate their evidence before proceeding to trial." As Maya's attorney fumbled through the paperwork for her release, Judge Wilson added, "Officer Whitley, you are ordered to surrender your badge and weapon to court security pending an internal investigation." "What?" Whitley exploded, rising to his feet. "This is bullshit." "You can't, officer," Judge Wilson cut him off sharply, "one more word and I'll hold you in contempt. This court has received evidence suggesting serious misconduct in your handling of this and several other cases." The courtroom erupted in whispers as two uniformed officers approached Whitley. His face contorted with rage as he looked at Maya, who maintained the same calm expression she'd worn throughout the proceedings. Outside the courthouse, Richards was waiting. "That buys us some time," he said as they walked briskly toward his car. "But Whitley has friends. Powerful ones. Chen can only hold them off so long without more evidence." "How much time?" Maya asked, already formulating a plan. 3 days, maybe 4 before they circle the wagons and make this go away." He handed her a phone. "Burner. My number's the only one in it. What's your play?" Maya thought about Aunt Loretta, about Tiana and the community they were trying to protect. About justice delayed and denied for too many people for too long. "I'm going to do what I was trained to do," she said quietly. "Gather intelligence, identify the network, and dismantle it from the inside out." Richards nodded, unsurprised. "Chen has a file on Whitley's supervisor, Lieutenant Marshall. He's been living well beyond his means for years now. And the property developers benefiting from the East Side revitalization all use the same law firm, Pearson and Whitley." Maya raised an eyebrow. "Relation?" "Brother," Richards confirmed. "Corporate attorney specializing in real estate development." "Family business," Maya murmured. "Convenient." That night, Maya didn't go home. Instead, she checked into a motel under a name she'd used during operations in Eastern Europe. Then she made a call. "Tiana? I need your help." Her young cousin arrived an hour later, eyes wide with questions. Maya explained as much as she could without compromising operational security, a habit too ingrained to break. "You were right about Whitley in the gentrification connection," Maya told her. "But it's bigger than that. I need to know everything your community organizing group has documented. Every incident, every complaint, every pattern you've noticed." Tiana pulled out her laptop. "We've been tracking this for 3 years. Nobody would listen." She opened a meticulously organized database of incidents, dates, officers involved, and outcomes. Most cases never even make it to court. People can't afford to fight, so they take plea deals, or they just disappear from the neighborhood. Maya scrolled through the data, impressed by her cousin's thoroughness. "This is good work. Intelligence grade good." "Yeah, well, when the system's rigged against you, you learn to document everything, Tiana said with a shrug that couldn't quite hide her pride at the compliment. For the next 48 hours, Maya operated like she was back in the field. She established surveillance on Whitley, his brother, and Lieutenant Marshall. She documented meetings, photographed handoffs, and followed money trails with techniques honed through years of counterterrorism work. On the third day, she infiltrated the law offices of Pearson and Whitley after hours, using skills that would have impressed her SEAL team instructors. The firm's files confirmed what she'd suspected: a coordinated effort between certain officers, developers, and city officials to systematically drive out longtime residents through targeted harassment, false arrests, and civil forfeitures. Property values in East Side had tripled in 3 years. Those who sold early got pennies on the dollar. Those who resisted faced increasing police scrutiny until, like Maya, they found themselves facing charges that would force them to sell their assets just to afford legal defense. It was elegant in its simplicity and devastating in its impact. And now Maya had the evidence to expose it all. But as she was photographing the final documents, Maya heard the office door open. She slipped into a supply closet seconds before Officer Whitley and his brother entered the room. "This is out of control, James," the attorney was saying, his voice tight with stress. "The DOJ is sniffing around. Marshall says we need to accelerate the timetable." "Screw the timetable," Whitley snapped. "That Jackson woman is the problem. She's connected, Tom. Military intelligence or something." "So what are you suggesting?" Whitley's voice lowered. "Same thing we did with those other cops who couldn't keep their mouths shut. Accidents happen." Maya's hand tightened around her phone, recording every word. "Jesus, James. You can't what? Protect what we've built. Half the department's on our payroll. The judge too, until this DOJ bitch showed up. One more accident isn't going to raise any flags." The attorney was silent for a long moment before sighing. "Fine. But make it clean. And after this, we go legitimate. No more shortcuts." "Sure," Whitley agreed, too quickly. "Legitimate. After we finish East Side." As they left, Maya sent the recording to Richards with a text, "Moving to Phase 2. Need extraction tomorrow, 0600. It was time to spring the trap. The next morning, Maya sat alone at a table in Riverside Park, a disposable cup of coffee cooling in front of her. The park was mostly empty at this hour, just a few joggers and people walking dogs. Perfect, her phone buzzed with a text from Richards, "Assets in position. Chen has a judge standing by for warrants once we have confirmation. Be careful." Maya typed back, "Always am," knowing it wasn't entirely true. Sometimes the mission required calculated risks. At precisely 5:55 a.m., Officer Whitley's patrol car pulled into the parking lot. Maya had known he would come. The anonymous tip about her whereabouts had been too tempting for him to ignore, especially since he was officially suspended and shouldn't be in uniform at all. She watched as he scanned the area, noting with professional appreciation how he checked for witnesses and cameras. He was methodical, she'd give him that. Just not as methodical as she was. Whitley approached slowly, one hand resting on his service weapon. Maya remained seated, presenting the picture of casual unconcern that she knew would infuriate him. "Morning, officer," she said, lifting her coffee cup in mock salute. "Aren't you supposed to be on suspension?" "Funny thing about paperwork," he replied, stopping a few feet from her table. "Sometimes it gets delayed. Like the paperwork officially charging you with assaulting an officer and resisting arrest." Maya raised an eyebrow. "Is that what happens next in your little script? I've seen more creative setups in third-world dictatorships." Whitley's face flushed with anger. "You think you're so smart. Military hotshot coming home, thinking you know how things work around here." "I know exactly how things work," Maya said evenly. "I know about the developers paying you to clear out East Side. I know about your brother's law firm handling the property transfers. I know about Lieutenant Marshall's new boat and vacation home that he definitely can't afford on his salary. For just a moment, uncertainty flickered across Whitley's face before his arrogance reasserted itself. Prove it, he sneered. Your word against mine. And in this town, a cop's word counts for a lot more than some drug dealers. Maya smiled then, the kind of smile that had made hardened terrorists reconsider their life choices. That's where you're wrong. See, I'm not just any military hotshot. She stood slowly, maintaining eye contact. Before I was Commander Jackson, I was Senior Chief Petty Officer Jackson, Naval Special Warfare Development Group. What civilians call SEAL Team 6. Whitley's hand tightened on his weapon, but he didn't draw. Not yet. Bullshit. There are no female SEALs. Officially? No. Unofficially? Maya shrugged. The military's been sending women into combat long before they were allowed to talk about it. My specialty was intelligence gathering and network disruption in hostile territory. She took a step forward. And Officer Whitley? This is the most amateur hostile network I've ever dismantled. She could see him processing this, reassessing her as a threat. His hand moved slightly, and Maya tensed, ready. Even if that's true, he said slowly, you're still just one person against half the department. Am I? Maya glanced past him, and Whitley turned to see Captain Richards approaching from one direction and Rebecca Chen from another. James Whitley, Chen called out, her voice carrying across the park. Department of Justice. You're in violation of your suspension order, and we have a warrant for your arrest on charges of evidence tampering, conspiracy, and civil rights violations. Whitley's hand flew to his weapon, drawing it with practiced speed, but Maya was already moving. 20 years of combat training took over as she closed the distance between them in 2 fluid steps. Before Whitley could level his gun, Maya had executed a perfect disarm technique: grip, twist, leverage that left him gasping in pain as his wrist bent at an unnatural angle. The gun clattered to the pavement. That's assaulting an officer, he spat through gritted teeth. Maya applied slight pressure to his wrist, causing him to drop to one knee. No, this is a citizen's arrest. And I'm being extraordinarily gentle, considering what you were planning to do to me. Richards and Chen reached them, along with the 2 agents who had been positioned around the park. As they took Whitley into custody, Maya released him, stepping back with the same controlled precision that had defined her military career. You have no idea what you've done, Whitley growled as the agents cuffed him. This goes deeper than you know. People will come after you. Maya met his gaze calmly. Let them try. Over the next several hours, the operation Richards and Chen had planned unfolded with military precision. Armed with the evidence Maya had gathered and Whitley's recorded threats, DOJ agents executed simultaneous raids on Lieutenant Marshall's home, the offices of Pearson and Whitley, and several other locations. By nightfall, 12 officers, 3 developers, and 2 city officials were in custody. Judge Wilson, implicated in several case files, had resigned and was cooperating with prosecutors in exchange for leniency. Maya watched the news coverage from Richard's temporary office at the federal building, feeling a complex mix of satisfaction and weariness. This kind of corruption wasn't new, she'd seen it in a dozen countries, but facing it in her hometown hit differently. What happens now? She asked Chen, who was sorting through mountains of seized documents. Now. Chen looked up, pushing a strand of hair behind her ear. Now we build the case, piece by piece. It's not as dramatic as your SEAL operations, but it's just as important. Richards entered, carrying 3 cups of coffee. The question is, what happens with you now, Jackson? Maya accepted the coffee, considering. I came home looking for peace. For something normal after 20 years of war. And instead, you found another war, Richard said quietly. Maybe that's the point, Maya mused. Maybe there's no such thing as coming home from war when there are still battles that need fighting right here. Chen set down her papers. The DOJ has a special task force focused on exactly this kind of systemic police corruption. We could use someone with your skills and perspective. Not interested in another government job, Maya said automatically. What about consulting? Richard suggested. On your terms. No bureaucracy, no uniform. Just you, doing what you do best, gathering intelligence, identifying corruption networks, and helping dismantle them. Maya thought about Aunt Loretta and Tiana, about all the families in East Side fighting to keep their homes and dignity. About justice delayed but, finally, not denied. I'll think about it, she said, which all three of them knew meant yes. 6 months later, Maya stood on the steps of the Riverside Federal Courthouse, watching as James Whitley was led away in handcuffs, convicted on 14 counts including conspiracy, evidence tampering, and civil rights violations. His brother and Lieutenant Marshal had both taken plea deals, their testimony helping to expose corruption that extended to neighboring jurisdictions. Beside her, Tiana was live streaming the moment for her community organization's social media. And that, folks, is what accountability looks like, she narrated. After decades of targeting our communities, these officers are finally facing justice themselves. Maya stayed off camera, still preferring to work in the shadows. In the months since Whitley's arrest, she had established a small but effective consulting practice, helping the DOJ and community organizations identify and document patterns of police misconduct across the country. Her methods were unorthodox, drawing on intelligence techniques rarely applied to domestic law enforcement oversight but undeniably effective. 3 similar corruption networks in 3 different states had been exposed using her approach. Commander Jackson. Maya turned to find a young officer in uniform standing respectfully at the bottom of the courthouse steps. She recognized her as one of the rookies who had come forward after Whitley's arrest, providing critical testimony about the pressure placed on new officers to participate in the corruption. Officer Reyes, Maya acknowledged with a nod. Congratulations on your promotion. Reyes smiled nervously. Thank you. It's a big responsibility, heading the new Internal Affairs Unit. She hesitated before continuing. Some of us were wondering if you might consider conducting a training session for the department. On ethical policing and community relations. A year ago, Maya would have laughed at the suggestion. Now, she considered it seriously. Send me the details. I'll think about it. As Reyes thanked her and left, Richards appeared at Maya's side. Turning into a proper civilian after all, Jackson. Teaching classes, consulting with the suits. Maya smiled. Just fighting a different kind of war, sir. They watched as the media swarmed around the courthouse entrance, where Rebecca Chen was giving a statement about the case's significance. You know, Richard said thoughtfully, when I recruited you for SEAL training all those years ago, some of the old guard said women didn't belong in special operations. Said they'd crack under pressure. I remember, Maya replied dryly. I told them they were missing the point. The best operators aren't the ones with the most testosterone or the biggest muscles. They're the ones who never lose sight of why they're fighting. He glanced at her. You never did. Maya thought about her journey from a girl growing up in East Side, to a warrior in distant lands, and now to a different kind of protector here at home. The battlefield had changed, but the mission remained the same: justice, protection, service. Never will, she promised quietly. In the distance, she could see Aunt Loretta waiting by the car, proudly watching her niece and grandniece making their community safer, each in their own way. Maya Jackson had finally found her way home, not to peace, but to purpose, and that, she realized, was what she'd been fighting for all along.